today we get you an in-depth look at the all-electric BYD eMAX7 and ride the Kawasaki KLX 230. Hello and welcome to Overdrive. I am Soini Dutt. Let me start by wishing you all a very joyous and prosperous Diwali. The MPV we are starting with today is one that BYD hopes will add to the brand's prosperity quotient in India. The BYD eMAX7 is a premium 6-seater MPV that has an option of a 71.8 kilowatt as well as a 55.4 kilowatt hour battery pack, and the brand hopes that it will eye a piece of the segment that is being dominated by the Toyota Innova. Why are we making such bold claims? Let's find out.
The Toyota Innova has been your only real option if you wanted an MPV for around rupees 30 lakhs. But can the new BYD eMAX7 change that? We'll find out in this video where we tell you how it drives, the kind of features that you get inside, how comfortable it is, and the kind of range that you can expect from this new EV. With the eMAX7, BYD is gunning for a more discerning private buyer, which is also reflected in the styling. So you have a sharper face that is now closer in theme to BYD's newer models. You see this with the segmented LED headlamps, the brushed silver bar where a grille would have been, and the ridged angular patterns in the bumpers. Despite the flash, it still has a simple theme that won't draw many opinions. You notice this in the slightly old-school cap-forward bodywork and glass area. It's not pretending to be an SUV, which is somewhat refreshing. The wheels, however, have been spruced up but are still 17 inches. Ground clearance is a decent 170 mm. The rear is probably the most distinctive with the wide, slightly Audi-like lighting and the full-width signature. BYD has gone a bit easy with the badging this time, which again makes for a simple but effective look. Now with these three-row MPVs, you're always left wondering how much space there actually is for your luggage, and it's not much different with the BYD eMAX7. Now it has a powered boot lid which helps, of course, and with the 3 rows up you have 180 liters, and as you can see that's good for maybe 2 or 3 backpacks. If you want a bit more space, then you can make this backrest a bit more upright, but you can also then fully fold these bits flat, and they're quite easy to do, as you can see. And when you do that, you realize that there's quite a bit more luggage, 580 liters to be precise. Yes, the lip is slightly high, but that's okay. With BYD trying to address a wider market, you have 2 battery options now. The smaller one is a 55.4 kWh unit with 420 kilometers of range, while the larger is a 71.8 kilowatt pack with 530 kilometers. These continue to be BYD's proprietary Blade battery tech, so while we didn't manage a full range test, it was clear driving the larger battery pack that you can expect close to 450 kilometers in the real world in regular driving. The battery seems to stay efficient for a wide range of driving situations, and you never really seem to find the need to drive conservatively to maximize range. The fairly accurate range indicator helps with this too. There's quite an MPV-like theme to driving the eMAX7. You have that big sloping windscreen in front of you, this large quarter glass, and that really does help with the cab forward design. It really does help open up the visibility. It's not amazingly good, but it's still nice, and you do get a nice panoramic view out. So again, keeping with the theme, the seats are again quite comfortable. The cushioning is just right, not too soft, not too firm. You're supported in all the right places. There's good under-thigh support, so you will be comfortable if you are behind the wheel for a reasonably long amount of time. First thing that usually catches your eye when you start driving these BYD cars is just how refined and how cohesive the whole drivetrain feels. Of course, performance has taken a big jump over the E6. You now have over 200 horsepower and 310 Newton meters of torque. But yeah, this performance is never unmanageable or rough in its delivery. So when you start off, it's a very smooth, natural flow. And then if you do want to get a move on, as you will see, there is a good dab of performance at hand. You really don't need this much performance in what is essentially going to be a people mover, but it's there. And the good part about it is that it's linear throughout. So even when you're close to say 100 kmph on the highway, you don't feel like it's tapering away, it's becoming a bit lethargic. It's linear and really quite easy to access. This seamless sense goes with the regen too. You have 2 levels of regen on off, and many times you never quite notice the eMAX7 going into regen. The transition from drive to regen to coasting feels mellow and natural as you find in an ICE car, so getting used to the EV experience is very easy. You also get 3 drive modes, but these don't change much of the driving experience. Anyway, given the way this car functions, you won't need to use anything other than the normal mode in most scenarios. Now in terms of how it feels, how comfortable it is, on a steady, smooth road like we're on right now, it's comfortable. Although we did notice that at higher speeds, it can get a bit busy. So especially when the road is not flat, you do notice that you have to make small corrections often. What we would have liked for a bit more is for the ride to have been a bit more pliant, a bit more grown up. You've seen EVs or just cars generally in this price point becoming quite well rounded in how they sort of absorb bumps and so on. But given that this is an EV and you're carrying a big deal of weight, you do notice that over bad roads, over rough surfaces, it can get slightly bouncy. And it doesn't quite cocoon you from the surface as well as it could have or maybe should have. But again, this is not something that is a deal breaker and just something that you might have to consider while owning one of these. The steering is easy enough for the city but doesn't feel too flighty at high speeds, so it's predictable. The low-slung EV mass also makes it competent around bends. It turns without much roll and manages to hide its weight well. It's not especially exciting, but an MPV also doesn't need to be so. It has multi-link rear suspension, which also comes with a good sense of grip. That said, we would have liked better feel from the brakes. There's quite a bit of lightness in initial travel which takes some getting used to.
The eMAX7 impresses once you're inside the cabin as well. More on that after this very short break. Welcome back, here with us on Overdrive. Price between 29.30 to 29.90 lakh rupees. The BYD eMAX7 has a lot to offer in terms of safety tech and features for the occupants once inside the cabin. Let's take a look.
Now, if you're familiar with the BYD E6, the car that preceded the eMAX7, then the cabin hasn't really changed all that much in terms of its general layout. So it's a simple functional shape. It's not, too flashy or too over the top like the other BYD cars that we know of. So it goes with that whole MPV-ish thing. And while the E6 was quite bare bones, you can say, with a single tone sort of interior theme, there has been some effort at making this place more premium for sure. So while the design itself is quite simple, you have hard materials more or less everywhere. There is a decent kind of quite different texture to it. But yeah, the plastics, they're hard, scratchy materials pretty much everywhere. But I must say that fit and finish levels are good and you have a good heft and sort of quality from all the controls. So for example, the vents, they work well. These indicator stocks, the buttons that are there on the steering wheel, they work like they're from an expensive car. And going with that theme, you also find soft materials on the door trim here, and even on the armrest. But really that premium feeling is most apparent right about here, where you see that you have this big new 12.8-inch touchscreen, and like all of these BYD screens, you have that rotating function to it. We did notice that in the portrait view, the screen blocks visibility somewhat and is generally easier to operate in the landscape mode. Gimmicks aside, this is a top-tier screen. It's responsive and fluid with a logical smartphone-like interface, which makes accessing the many functions within it easy. This helps because all of the climate controls are in here, as is the seat ventilation function. These are always easy to draw up, which is somewhat of a saving grace. Also quick and fluid is the smartphone integration. And then there's this section which again has been redone, and this gear selector, it's different from what was on the E6, and like how I just mentioned for all the controls, it has a high quality feel to it. It's crisp, it works quite precisely, so it's nice to use. And like how it is with BYDs, most of the functions are in the screen, but you have some shortcuts here which do their job pretty well. There is a large space to charge your phone wirelessly, quite a few USB Type A and Type C chargers, and a good storage arrangement in the center console. There's even an SD card reader, but we think the door bins could have held more. A lot of effort has gone into premiumizing this space, but this digital instrument cluster seems out of place. It's been carried over from the E6, and while the MID has been reworked, it still has that slightly old school feel to it. You don't really want analog dials in an EV, and while they do their job, this MID, it's a bit difficult to get used to. You can toggle through, but it doesn't show you too much information, and generally it doesn't quite gel with that whole modern vibe of the rest of the space. Having said that, BYD has loaded the eMAX7 packed full of features. Here's what's on offer. As you can see, getting into the eMAX7 is quite easy. The opening itself is quite wide, and this door opens nearly 90 degrees, so you step quite smoothly inside, and this is the kind of space that you have on offer. Now, To be honest, it's not as big as an Innova High Cross, but the eMAX7 is also a smaller car. It has a wheelbase of 2800 mm. And as you can see, in isolation, it's good enough. I mean, I have pushed this seat to the rearmost position. I can obviously slide it and forward, and there's also a generous recline angle. And as you can see, this is the kind of legroom I have. I can tuck my knees into the front seats, under the front seats, and even with this big sunroof, at least for me, there's a good deal of headroom. So yes, someone over 6 feet tall or closer to 6 feet tall, they might have a problem. Now for the things that I don't like, while the backrest itself is quite supportive for me, it's not tiring over long distances, I do feel like the under thigh support could have been better. Again, it comes from that whole EV architecture thing. The floor is slightly high, so you do sit with a slight lack of thigh support. But you do have a fully flat floor, so there's that functionality, which is great. And then there are a good set of amenities. You don't have a different aircon zone, but you can choose the fan speed. You have two fast charging Type A and Type C ports. A small cubby here, maybe there could have been a wireless charger here, something like that. And some thoughtful pockets here as well for your phones. And I must say the vents are quite effectively placed. Safety has also been given good thought here, as we have seen in other BYD models. Now, one advantage of these seats being just manually adjustable is that you can push them right forward, and getting into the third row is relatively simple. Now, as you can see, it's the usual third row fare in the back of the eMAX7. So for me, it's okay. I'm 5'7", 5'8", and this is the kind of headroom I have. Maybe the headlining could have been scooped out for a bit more space, but it's fine for me. But in that sense, legroom is good. I have enough space here. This seat has been pushed to its rearmost position, and I still have this much. So in that aspect, it's fine. And then you have the usual sort of experience in the third row. Now, this arrangement is not particularly wide, so if you are of a wider frame and there are two people sitting here, it's going to be slightly difficult. And then, of course, you notice that you don't have too much in the way of thigh support. But I have to say that if you aren't too tall and you are an adult, you can do, say, a couple of hours long journey here. It's not going to be very difficult. Now, I would have liked some amenities here. While you do have your own AC vent, there are no charge ports here, which I think is a bit of a miss. You do get a cup holder, and yeah, the seat back, like I showed you earlier, it reclines. Priced at Rs 29.90 lakh for this top-end version, the BYD eMAX7 comes across as a competent MPV. Its EV drivetrain is what will separate it from the competition, which it executes very well. While we would have liked a more comfortable ride and a better second row seat, it has enough going for it in terms of its refinement, space and features to be a strong contender.
Well, it's time to head into our final break here on the show, but coming up on the other side, we'll tell you all about the new Kawasaki KLX 230.